Jack never imagined a simple argument could unravel his entire life. He had only asked Melissa to join his family gathering, yet she mocked everything about his relatives as if they were beneath her. Her words lingered in his mind long after the conversation ended, leaving a sting he couldn't quite shake off. But before he could make sense of her sudden disdain, a phone call shattered the rest of his day. His grandmother, Eleanor, had passed away, and with her final breath came an unexpected inheritance, nearly $800,000 in property and investments. The shock was overwhelming, but something far more unsettling followed. The moment Melissa heard about the inheritance, her tone shifted from irritation to syrupy sweetness, as if the argument had never happened. Jack felt an unease rising in his chest, sensing that this twist of fate was only the beginning of something darker. Jack arrived at the attorney's office expecting a brief meeting, maybe a simple confirmation of what belonged to whom. He sat quietly at the long wooden table, hands clasped, unsure of what his grandmother could have possibly left behind. But when the will was read aloud, every word felt heavier than the last. He learned he wasn't just receiving a small keepsake or a sentimental heirloom. Eleanor had left him everything: her farmhouse, the surrounding acres of land, and a carefully managed investment portfolio worth more than he ever imagined. Nearly $800,000 in total. Jack felt lightheaded as the attorney slid a folder toward him with maps, documents, valuations, and instructions Eleanor had prepared long before her passing. It wasn't about the money. It was the realization that she had trusted him entirely, chosen him intentionally, and believed in his character enough to pass on the legacy she cherished all her life. The moment he stepped outside the office, the world felt different, quieter, yet somehow heavier. He drove home in silence, processing the weight of everything he had just learned. Before he even parked, his phone buzzed with a barrage of messages from Melissa. At first, he thought she was reaching out to apologize for the argument, maybe to make peace. But the moment he read her words, his stomach twisted. Her tone was suddenly sweet, overly affectionate, coated with a kind of enthusiasm that didn't feel real. She asked about the inheritance with a familiar curiosity, the kind she usually reserved for sales, discounts, or anything that benefited her directly. She then called him, pretending to be breathless with excitement, asking how our future would look now. Jack froze at the phrase. Their future. She spoke as if the inheritance automatically belonged to both of them, as if she had the right to plan around it. She talked about renovations they could do, vacations they could take, even how they should invest part of the money together. It was surreal. Just hours earlier, she had mocked his family, dismissed the event, and barely acknowledged his feelings. Now she was acting like a devoted partner, suddenly warm and affectionate in a way that felt manufactured. Jack listened quietly, unsure whether to confront her or simply let her talk. He felt an uncomfortable shift, an instinctual warning that something wasn't right. Her voice grew more possessive as the conversation continued. She asked when they could visit the farmhouse together. She wanted to see their property, a phrase she repeated with startling confidence. Jack's chest tightened at the entitlement in her tone. It wasn't grief for Eleanor or support for him that motivated her sudden change. It was opportunity. It was the moment she realized he now controlled wealth she never expected him to have. And as Jack hung up the phone, a quiet dread crept into him. The inheritance that felt like a final gift from someone he loved dearly had already begun to reveal someone else's true intentions. Melissa wasted no time, turning Jack's life upside down. The morning after the will was announced, she arrived at his apartment uninvited, acting as if she had every right to be there. She brought two of her closest friends, people Jack barely knew, and they spoke with the confidence of financial advisors who believed they owned a stake in his future. They sat around his living room, casually discussing how he should responsibly divide the inheritance. They spoke in percentages, suggesting he share a large portion with Melissa because she has been with you for years. One of them even joked that Jack should consider giving them a cut for helping Melissa keep him grounded. Jack stared in disbelief, realizing they weren't joking at all. Melissa leaned in, her eyes sharp and calculating despite the soft smile she wore. She told him that now was the perfect time for them to think like a real couple, to combine finances, to build a shared life using what she called their assets. Jack felt something inside him detach. He tried to gently explain that the inheritance was meant to honor Eleanor and that he needed time to process everything. But Melissa treated his hesitation like an insult. She raised her voice, accusing him of being selfish, of excluding her from decisions that affected both of them. Her friends chimed in, adding pressure, claiming that any loving partner would share such a blessing. Jack felt cornered, suffocated by a conversation he never agreed to have. After they left, the apartment felt hostile, as if their presence had tainted the space. Jack paced back and forth for hours, trying to understand how Melissa could shift so quickly from indifference to possessive greed. By nightfall, he made a decision. He packed a small bag, booked a room at a nearby hotel, and left without informing her. He needed space, distance from the noise, the expectations, and the manipulative energy that hung over him. But Melissa didn't take his silence lightly. When she realized he was gone, she called repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails that swung between tearful pleading and angry accusations. One moment she sobbed, saying she needed him, claiming she only wanted to support him. The next moment she raged, accusing him of abandoning her, threatening that he would regret treating her this way. Jack watched the notifications stack up on his phone, feeling both exhausted and strangely numb. Every message confirmed what he already sensed. Melissa wasn't grieving with him. She was fighting for access, to control, to money, to a life she suddenly believed she deserved. By midnight, she was showing up at his apartment door, pounding and shouting for him to let her in. Jack stayed in the hotel, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the inheritance hadn't changed who Melissa was. It had simply exposed her. And as he lay there in the dim light of the hotel room, he finally understood that stepping away wasn't an escape. It was the first step toward protecting himself from someone who saw him not as a partner, but as a prize. Jack returned to his apartment 2 days later with one simple goal: grab his belongings and leave before Melissa noticed he was there. He parked several blocks away, hopping not to draw attention, and walked up the stairwell quietly, rehearsing the plan in his mind. But the moment he unlocked the door, he sensed something was off. The lights were already on. Voices echoed from the living room, voices that did not belong to Melissa alone. When he stepped inside, he saw her sitting on the couch between her parents, all three of them looking as if they had been waiting for him. Melissa stood abruptly, her expression a mix of triumph and desperation. Her mother folded her arms, her father sat stiffly, and the atmosphere in the room thickened like smoke. Jack froze at the doorway, realizing this was no coincidence. This was an ambush. Before he could even speak, Melissa's father launched into a lecture about responsibility, commitment, and the duty Jack owed their daughter now that he had money. Her mother chimed in, implying that any honorable man would share his good fortune with the woman who had stood by him. Jack clenched his jaw as Melissa nodded vigorously, pretending to be the supportive girlfriend who was being unfairly excluded. Then, as if reading from a rehearsed script, Melissa made her boldest claim yet. She announced that she was pregnant. The room fell silent, waiting for Jack's reaction. His heart didn't race. His breath didn't catch. Instead, there was only a cold, steady calm. He knew she was lying. He had suspected she might go this far, but hearing the words out loud was still jarring. He asked her gently, but firmly, how long she had known. Her story cracked immediately. She blurted out a timeline that made no sense, then stumbled through excuses, changing details with each sentence. Her parents exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unprepared for how badly her story was unraveling. Jack took one slow breath and told them he knew the claim wasn't true. He explained, without anger, that Melissa had been manipulating him since the inheritance was announced. He talked about the sudden shift in her behavior, the pressure from her friends, and the increasingly aggressive demands. Melissa's facade crumbled. She alternated between shouting and sobbing, insisting that she only lied because she was scared of losing him. Her mother grabbed her arm, urging her to calm down, while her father muttered angrily under his breath about poor decisions. Jack didn't raise his voice. He simply picked up the bag he had left by the door and told them he was leaving for good. Melissa lunged toward him, begging, accusing, reaching for his arm, but he stepped back. He told her the same truth he had told himself in the quiet of the hotel room. He could no longer stay in a relationship built on lies, greed, and manipulation. As he walked out, her cries echoed through the hallway, followed by her father's frustrated attempts to quiet her down. Jack descended the stairs with a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Outside, the air felt clearer. He blocked her number, then her parents', finally cutting off every channel they had used to control him. For the first time since the inheritance changed everything, Jack felt a fragile but unmistakable sense of freedom. He had walked into an ambush, but he walked out with something far more valuable than the assets he inherited. He walked out with clarity. Melissa did not disappear quietly after Jack cut all contact. Within a week, he was served a notice informing him that she had hired a lawyer and intended to take legal action. Jack stared at the document in disbelief, rereading the bold claims printed across the page. Melissa was asserting that she had rights to his inheritance, as if they were a married couple dissolving shared assets. It was an argument built on fantasy, but she was determined to force it into reality. When Jack met with his own attorney, the man looked at the paperwork, raised an eyebrow, and let out a slow sigh. He explained that the claim had no legal foundation, and that the opposing lawyer clearly lacked the competence to pursue anything substantial. Still, the situation infuriated Jack. He had spent weeks trying to distance himself from Melissa's manipulation, only to find her grasp extending through legal threats and desperate tactics. When the first meeting between the attorneys took place, Melissa's lawyer argued aggressively, insisting that she had contributed emotionally to Jack's life and therefore deserved financial compensation. Jack's attorney dismantled every point calmly and efficiently, citing state laws, relationship status, and the complete lack of any shared assets or cohabitation agreements. The meeting ended quickly, leaving Melissa visibly shaken and her lawyer fumbling for excuses. But instead of accepting defeat, she escalated. Within days, Jack discovered several false posts circulating online. Melissa had turned to social media, painting him as a selfish man who abandoned her after inheriting money. She accused him of using her, lying to her, and discarding her the moment he became wealthy enough to ignore real loyalty. Jack watched the accusations pile up with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. But things didn't unfold the way Melissa expected. People who knew Jack stepped forward immediately: his coworkers, neighbors, family friends. Comments flooded in challenging her claims, reminding her of the way she had mocked his family, pressured him, and openly flaunted entitlement to the inheritance. Some even shared their own experiences with her, detailing her manipulative tendencies and habit of twisting stories for sympathy. Melissa responded with frantic energy, arguing with strangers, deleting comments, reposting slightly altered accusations as if repetition would make them true. But every attempt to rewrite the narrative only made her look more unstable. Jack's family issued a short, calm statement online, expressing grief over Eleanor's passing and clarifying that the inheritance was her private decision made long before Melissa entered Jack's life. That single message carried more weight than all of Melissa's rambling posts combined. Over the following days, her credibility eroded quickly. Her dramatic claims were met with skepticism, then mockery, then complete silence. Jack didn't engage once. He didn't comment, didn't defend himself directly, didn't respond to the chaos she was creating. And that silence seemed to infuriate her more than anything. By the end of the week, her posts had lost traction. The attention she desperately sought had turned into subtle embarrassment, leaving her shouting into a void that no longer cared. Jack closed his laptop one evening, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief wash over him. He hadn't wanted a war, especially not during a time when he still mourned Eleanor. But Melissa had dragged him into one, and now it was finally starting to fall apart in her hands. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt the noise around him begin to fade, leaving room for something quieter, steadier, and far more honest than the lies she had tried to build. Melissa's desperation didn't fade after her online attacks fell apart. If anything, it grew sharper, more unpredictable, as if she were clinging to the last scraps of control she believed she still had. Jack tried to distance himself by focusing on the farmhouse and the work that needed to be done, but Melissa refused to vanish. One afternoon, when Jack drove out to the property to meet a contractor, he saw a familiar car parked beside the old barn. His stomach dropped. Standing near the fence were Melissa and a man he had never seen before, a tall, muscular guy with a smug expression and an energy that radiated provocation. Melissa waved dramatically as Jack approached, acting as though she had every right to be there. She introduced the man as Derek, her new boyfriend, emphasizing the words with childish exaggeration. Her voice carried the unmistakable intention of stirring jealousy, but all Jack felt was exhaustion. Derek smirked and made comments about how romantic the farmhouse looked, hinting that he and Melissa might move in when the legal stuff was sorted out. Jack ignored him entirely. He told Melissa to leave the property immediately, reminding her that she had no right to be there. Instead of backing down, she stepped closer and accused him of being selfish, insisting that she still deserved a share of the land. Jack didn't argue. He simply pulled out his phone and called the sheriff's office, reporting trespassers on private property. Melissa's expression shifted from confidence to panic, and within minutes she was dragging Derek back to their car, cursing under her breath as they sped away. Jack felt shaken, but relieved that he had handled it without losing his composure. He hoped that encounter would be the end of it. But Melissa wasn't done yet. A few days later, Jack received a call from a real estate agent he'd never met. The woman cheerfully informed him she was finalizing paperwork regarding an offer on the back acreage of the property and wanted to confirm a meeting time. Jack nearly dropped his phone. He asked her who had authorized the listing. The agent confidently replied that Melissa had, explaining she introduced herself as the owner's fiancée and claimed she was managing the estate on Jack's behalf. Jack's pulse hammered in his ears. He immediately told the agent that Melissa had no authority and that any attempted transaction was fraudulent. The agent apologized profusely, promised to cancel everything, and forwarded the documents Melissa had tried to sign, including forged signatures. Jack stared at the pages, stunned by how far she was willing to go. He contacted his lawyer the same afternoon. Together, they issued formal cease and desist letters, notified the county offices, and locked down every asset tied to the property. Access codes, account permissions, property files, everything was secured. Jack spent hours reviewing paperwork with the attorney, ensuring that no loophole remained for Melissa to exploit. By the time they were done, Jack felt emotionally drained but firmly grounded. He had protected what Eleanor left him from someone who only saw it as a prize to be taken. That night, while sitting alone in the farmhouse's quiet kitchen, he realized Melissa had finally reached the end of her influence. Her attempts to manipulate, threaten, shame, and steal had all collapsed. And in their ruin, Jack saw her clearly for the first time, not as the partner he once hoped she could be, but as someone who would burn everything around her just to feel victorious. This was the lowest point she had reached, a desperate grasp at a future that was never hers. And for Jack, it marked the moment he finally stepped out of the shadow she had cast over his life. Jack began spending more time at the farmhouse once the chaos with Melissa finally died down. The property felt peaceful in a way he had almost forgotten was possible, and each day he worked on restoring it brought him a small but meaningful sense of direction. He repaired fences, cleared out overgrown bushes, and repainted the porch that Eleanor used to sit on every evening. The silence of the land wasn't empty anymore. It was healing. During one of his supply runs into town, he met Hannah at the hardware store, a woman with a calm presence and a genuine warmth that felt disarmingly sincere. She recognized him from the local newspaper's announcement about Eleanor's passing and offered her condolences without a trace of curiosity or judgment. Their conversation was simple, easy, and honest in a way that felt rare after everything he had been through. Over the next few weeks, they crossed paths again, at the farmer's market, at the diner, at the small community center where Eleanor used to volunteer. Each time, their conversations grew a little longer, a little more meaningful. Hannah listened when Jack talked about the farmhouse, the repairs, and the memories tied to every creaking floorboard. She shared stories about growing up in the area and how she used to admire Eleanor for her kindness and straightforward spirit. It surprised Jack how natural it felt to open up around her. There was no pressure, no expectation, only presence. And that presence became something he found himself looking forward to. Meanwhile, Jack made an important decision regarding the inheritance. He met with a financial advisor and arranged to sell a portion of the unused land, just enough to create a scholarship fund in Eleanor's name. He wanted her values to live beyond the property, wanted her generosity to touch lives she would have been proud of. The process was long and packed with details, but every step reminded him why Eleanor had trusted him. She believed he would use what she left behind wisely and selflessly. And now, he was finally doing exactly that. As for Melissa, her life was moving in the opposite direction. Her family stepped in after her repeated outbursts, urging her to leave town for a while, to get help, to distance herself from the chaos she had created. Eventually, she moved to a different city, far from the farmhouse, far from the community that no longer entertained her stories. A few months later, Jack received a letter with her handwriting on the envelope. He considered ignoring it, but something told him to read it. Inside was a shaky apology. No excuses, no manipulation, only a confession that her pride and jealousy had consumed her. She admitted she had treated him terribly, acknowledged the hurt she caused, and wrote that she hoped he would build a peaceful life he deserved. Jack folded the letter quietly and put it away. Not out of bitterness, but out of closure. Life continued to settle into something steady and good. Jack and Hannah spent more time together at the farmhouse, chatting over coffee on the porch, walking the fields at sunset, and sharing moments that felt effortless. For the first time in a long while, Jack wasn't rebuilding alone. He kept the farmhouse exactly as Eleanor would have wanted, full of life, full of purpose, full of quiet gratitude. And every evening, as he locked up the doors and looked out over the fatting light, he felt a calm certainty take root inside him. The storm had passed. A new chapter had begun. And he was finally living in the kind of peace that people often spend a lifetime searching for. Jack kept the farmhouse as the heart of his new life, preserving every tradition Eleanor had cherished. The wooden porch, once weathered and fatting, now stood bright and welcoming, a place where he and Hannah often shared quiet mornings with coffee in hand. The fields surrounding the property slowly returned to their former beauty, reminding him daily of the legacy he had been entrusted with. He continued managing the scholarship fund, receiving letters from students whose futures were changed by Eleanor's generosity, each message reinforcing the purpose behind his choices. Jack no longer felt weighed down by the turmoil that had once consumed him. Instead, he felt grounded, steady, and grateful for the clarity that had emerged from the chaos. Hannah became a constant presence, not as a replacement for what he lost, but as someone who understood the value of peace and the strength it took to rebuild. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jack remembered something Eleanor had told him long ago. Money never changes who a person is, it only reveals them. He breathed deeply, realizing the truth of those words. And with that understanding, he stepped fully into the life he was always meant to live.